Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful, Rabbit Hole, King Deal, Lauren Frey, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. So there are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to Square Enix. We could talk about like the Embracer acquisitions. We can talk about their claiming they want to pursue more joint ventures. We can talk about them like struggling to sell Final Fantasy XVI. We can talk about the issues of like going PlayStation exclusive in a generation where PlayStation is becoming increasingly irrelevant. There are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to Square Enix right now, and I really should be making individual videos talking about all of them. One of my big regrets right now is actually that I do not have time to sit and talk about each incident as they happen, because there are a lot of signs that point to the fact that Square Enix is struggling right now. So much so, in fact, that I strongly suspect they are going to be the next Konami, meaning the next major Japanese publisher to bow out of the gaming industry, or at least like stop being a major player, because Square is showing all the telltale signs that they are desperate, right? They are releasing a lot of Nintendo exclusive titles. They are doing a bunch of things they wouldn't normally do. They remade Final Fantasy VII-R, which was a failure. They're doing all these like desperate moves to try and like placate their audience while they try to desperately reorient themselves and try to rebuild their business. And I don't think it's going to work. I do think Square has fundamentally like shot themselves in the foot so many times that like nobody really cares anymore. Like Final Fantasy, they ran the Final Fantasy IP into the ground essentially, and all of their smaller IPs are like low budget like niche things that appeal to a fringe audience on Nintendo platforms, which they specifically do not want. What Square and other Japanese third parties want are major PlayStation like cinematic experiences that Sony will foot the bill for. Like that's what they want. They want to appeal to mainstream audiences. That's why they've been going down this direction of like making everything moving away from turn-based, making everything like overly cinematic, trying to appeal to normies and casuals. Right. But what's been happening is that's not viable anymore. Right. People aren't impressed by like pretty visuals in the current year. Like what they want is compelling, engaging gameplay experiences. Like I feel that Square is not providing that outside of the Nintendo exclusive lineup. Like stuff like Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy were surprisingly great coming from the company. In fact, it's weird that I'm saying this now, that Square Enix is doomed when they've been putting out some of the best games they have in years on Nintendo Switch. But you have to understand, like, these are like highly talented, like passionate people who are just being allowed to make the games they want to make, right? Like the core like big name like developers at Square Enix have no idea what they're doing, none at all. I have no faith in like the Final Fantasy brand. I have no faith in them making a recovery. I have no faith in them like returning to like a classic big IP. Like again, Octopath Traveler is something that excited me personally because it deviated a lot from what makes modern Square terrible, right? A focus on like real world building, in a unique setting with a really well-rounded out cast of characters with really solid turn-based combat, which is all I really wanted from Square, right? Like if I wanted an action game, I would play like Bayonetta or some Platinum games, which by the way are also shitting the bed. But Square Enix, actually they actually had a crossover with Babylon's Fall, which is one of the biggest failures in gaming history. But when it comes to Square Enix, when it comes to what they're doing, make no mistake, like the reason they're pumping out so many Nintendo exclusive titles is to make up the fact that they're like their real business of making PlayStation exclusive ones is failing, right? Like this is what they do every time that something happens. Like they did this during the bankruptcy. They did this during like 2013 when like Final Fantasy 13 didn't make its money back. They did this and they're doing this now. Is that like they develop for their core audience of Nintendo fans whenever they're desperate for cash, whenever they're desperate for like some good publicity. And I think that's all that this is. Like the surprising amount of good games coming from them is just them trying to convince the audience that like we're still good, we're still great. But the audience, I think, is increasingly aware that like the people making Octopath Triangle Strategy, Octopath Traveler 2, stuff like that. Like those people have nothing to do with like the leadership at Square and like the big name IPs. Like it's been discussed on 4chan that like because Final Fantasy 16 is a PlayStation exclusive, it in an era where PlayStation exclusives are doomed to fail because the console just isn't all that popular. It's possible Final Fantasy 16 might be the worst performing Final Fantasy game ever. You know, like 15 was a disaster to begin with. Like people don't really appreciate like the lengthy development cycle, like the budget and just how it didn't make any of its money back. But like 16 might be the game where we actually see the chickens come home to roost for this, where we actually see some repercussions for what they've been doing for the past couple of years. Final Fantasy 14, I think, is stagnating. I haven't heard anyone say that 14 is like saving MMOs in years. Like, I do think the audience is getting bored of that as well. 13 is, of course, like the biggest failure of all time. And like, I think 12 and 11 were only popular because oh man, it's Final Fantasy. Like the decline hadn't set in yet, right? People didn't know that Final Fantasy has been bad since like 10.2. Like people were just glad not to be getting like 10.3, like or something. Like I don't know exactly what to expect from like the future of gaming, but I do know that like Square leaving Nintendo in the 90s to develop Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation was a mistake. It absolutely was. Like, again, people don't talk about this, but they went bankrupt within 5 years. Like, people don't like to associate those two things. They like to blame the movie, but the movie was financed by Sony because of their partnership. They thought they could do a movie because of the success of Final Fantasy VII. That's why that happened. That's why they went bankrupt. That's why they merged with Enix and made like their two great companies like objectively worse, right? Like that's why they stopped producing good games, because of a PlayStation exclusive contract. And now we're kind of getting to that point where I think Square might actually, no matter how much money they accept from Sony, that's not going to get around the fact that the audience just 100% does not want games to be on PlayStation. Like if Dragon Quest 12 is PlayStation exclusive, which is a very real possibility, it's going to bomb. Like there is no salvaging it. Like the Japanese audience will not tolerate that. They would want a Switch version, and it would kind of go against like Hori's like stated philosophy of like releasing on the most popular hardware, which I'm sure isn't actually the case. I'm aware Sony actually paid for Dragon Quest VII to be released on PlayStation, just like they did with Final Fantasy VII. So I am curious just how this is going to play out. Of course, we don't know a lot about Final Fantasy 16 yet. We don't know about anything about Dragon Quest 12. But like, if they really signed an exclusivity contract with Sony to make PlayStation 5 exclusive games, we are going to see like a bloodbath. I think this could be a big controversy in the next couple of years. And we've already seen like a couple of major ones with like the release of Babylon's Fall and things like that. Like Square Enix is in a bad position right now, and it's not one that I hear a lot of people talking about.